Imagine this. German soldiers came to America as prisoners during World War II. They expected hunger, pain, and punishment. Instead, something shocking happened. They got fat. Not a little fat. Many gained 50 pounds or more. How is this possible? These were enemy soldiers, but they ate meat, butter, milk, chocolate, Coca-Cola, even ice cream. While their families in Germany were starving, they were gaining weight in prison. One soldier said later, "When I was captured, I weighed 128 pounds. After 2 years in America, I weighed 185. I was so fat you could not see my eyes." So the question is clear. How could America, at war, feed its enemies better than Germany fed its own people? October 17th, 1943. Camp Aliceville, Alabama. The night was quiet, but inside the camp kitchen there was life. Pots clanged, steam hissed from giant kettles. The smell of eggs, bacon, and coffee filled the dark air. A thin German prisoner held a mess kit in his shaking hands. For 3 years in the Afrika Korps, he had eaten almost nothing. Hard bread full of worms, fake coffee made from acorns, a little dried meat, sometimes horse, sometimes mule, dried vegetables that tasted of dust. His ribs showed through his uniform. He weighed only 128 pounds. Now he stepped forward and froze. On the table in front of him was more food than he had seen in months. Scrambled eggs, soft and yellow. Bacon, hot and shiny with fat. White bread with real butter. A mug of hot coffee, rich with sugar and cream. His eyes widened. His stomach growled, but also hurt, not used to real food. He whispered in German to the man behind him, "This is a trick. They will take it away." But the guard only smiled and said in English, slowly, "Eat. Take your time." The prisoner lifted his fork. He tasted the eggs. Warm, soft, salty. His body shook. Tears filled his eyes. Another prisoner laughed nervously. Another cried openly. Some stared as if they were dreaming. For many, it was too much. Their stomachs, weak from years of hunger, could not handle the fat. They vomited after a few bites. Yet the food kept coming. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, every single day. Even before arriving at the camp, they had been shocked. On the Liberty ships crossing the Atlantic, cooks had served beef stew with potatoes, white bread with butter, and coffee with sugar and milk. It was more than a week's rations in Africa. Some men thought it was a special show for propaganda. But then came dessert, ice cream, made by a machine right on the ship, cold, sweet, creamy. Many had not seen ice cream since childhood. One soldier wrote in his diary, "We had ice cream in the middle of the ocean. I thought I was dreaming." When the ships docked at American ports, the shocks continued. Norfolk, Virginia, Newport News. Giant cranes lifted cargo. Warehouses stood taller than churches. Trains waited on endless tracks. Everything looked huge, alive, efficient. At the port exchange, the shop for workers, the prisoners saw shelves full of candy bars. Hershey, Mars, Nestle. Each bar cost only 5 cents. Guards told them this was the same price American children paid with their allowance. German soldiers whispered in disbelief, "Candy for children? In Germany, chocolate is for officers only." Then came the train rides inland. They expected cattle cars, like in Europe. But instead they sat in real passenger coaches with cushions, windows, and lights. In the dining cars, waiters served them fried chicken, mashed potatoes, pie, and coffee. They looked out the windows at endless farms and towns, every field green, every town alive. When they reached the camps, the surprises did not stop. Camp Aliceville had electric lights, hot water, and toilets that flushed. For many German peasants, this was the first time they had seen such things. The barracks were heated in winter, the kitchens worked day and night. The mess halls offered meals that felt impossible. Meat, bread, vegetables, milk, coffee. Bowls of sugar sat on every table, free to take. In Germany, sugar was rationed to a few grams per week. Here, it was unlimited. Prisoners filled their cups with white crystals, amazed. One wrote later, "In Germany, sugar was gold. Here it was like sand." At first, many prisoners thought this was a trick. They whispered, "It will not last. They will starve us later." But it did last. Week after week, month after month. The Geneva Convention required that prisoners eat the same rations as American soldiers, and America could do it. Its farms and factories produced more food than it could even use. By the end of 1943, the medical officers began writing reports. Prisoners who had arrived as skeletons were gaining weight fast. Some gained 40 pounds, some 50, some even more. A few men became almost unrecognizable. Families back home, starving on 1-200 calories a day, would not believe it. Inside the barbed wire, the food became more than survival. It became a lesson. A message stronger than any speech. America had so much power, so much wealth, that even its enemies could live better in prison than Germans lived in freedom. And for the prisoners, every bite was proof that everything they had been told about America was a lie. Life in the camps was strange for the German prisoners. They were enemies, yet they ate like friends. They were locked behind barbed wire, yet they often lived better than their families in Germany. The camps were built quickly, but they had electricity, running water, and heat. For many prisoners, it was their first time seeing flush toilets or hot showers. Some laughed in surprise the first time they pulled the handle on a toilet. Others wrote home, "Here even prisoners live with comfort we never had in Germany." The food became the center of their days. Breakfast often meant eggs, bacon, toast with butter, coffee with sugar and cream. Lunch brought meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread, and sometimes cake. Dinner repeated the pattern, always hot, always filling. The calories were huge, between 3,000 and 4,000 a day, enough for men to rebuild their bodies after years of hunger. In Camp Aliceville, the medical staff measured weight gain carefully. At arrival, many men were skin and bone. After 3 months, they had gained 20 pounds. After 6 months, 30 to 40 pounds. Some men gained 50 or 60 before they went home. Doctors wrote reports. Vitamin deficiencies gone, teeth repaired, energy returned, men are unrecognizable. But the change was not only in the body, it was in the mind. German soldiers had been told that America was weak, poor, and divided. Nazi propaganda said Americans were soft, lazy, and could not fight. But in the camps, prisoners saw the opposite. They saw giant bakeries producing thousands of loaves every day. They saw milk delivered in big metal cans, fresh from American farms. They saw sugar poured into coffee like sand, never measured, never rare. One prisoner said, "In Germany, sugar is gold. Here it is dust. They throw it away." At first, many could not believe it was real. Some thought it was just for show, that the Americans wanted to trick them. But the days turned into weeks, and the meals never stopped. Slowly, they understood. This was not a show. This was normal life in America. Letters home carried the truth. Prisoners wrote carefully, knowing censors read every word. But even with restrictions, the message was clear. Hans Miller wrote, "Mother, please do not worry. We eat 3 times every day. There is bread, butter, meat, and even sweets. I am gaining weight. I almost feel guilty when I think of you." His mother, reading in bombed-out Hamburg, could hardly believe it. She lived on watery soup and a little bread. Her son, a prisoner, ate better than she did in freedom. The contrast grew sharper during holidays. Thanksgiving 1943 was unforgettable. Every camp in America served roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, and coffee. German prisoners ate the same feast as American soldiers. One man later said, "That night, I did not feel like a prisoner. I felt like a guest at a king's table." At Christmas, American church groups sent gifts, homemade cookies, knitted scarves, even small toys for the prisoners to send home. Some German soldiers cried when they opened the packages. They had expected hatred, but found kindness. The guilt grew heavier. They knew their families in Germany had almost nothing. In Berlin, people ate turnips for weeks. In the camps, men ate turkey and pie. Some prisoners wept quietly at the table, but there was also joy. Food gave life. For the first time in years, they were warm, full, and safe. Some even began to smile again. And slowly, many began to question the lies they had believed. If America could treat its enemies this, well, was it truly the weak, divided nation Hitler had described? Or was it something stronger, so strong it could afford to be generous even in war? By 1944, the system of camps in America was running smoothly. More than 400,000 German prisoners were spread across the country. From Texas to Kansas, from Alabama to California, they lived behind fences but ate like free men. The American government kept records of everything. Quartermasters wrote down how much meat, sugar, milk, and bread was delivered each week. Red Cross inspectors visited the camps and confirmed the food was real, the portions were generous, the prisoners were healthy. One inspector wrote, "The German prisoners are better fed than most civilians in Europe. They gain weight steadily. The American camps follow the Geneva rules exactly. And the weight gains were incredible. Many prisoners gained 40, 50, even 60 pounds. Their faces became round. Their uniforms grew tight. Some men laughed when they saw themselves in mirrors. I left Africa a skeleton. Now I look like a farmer after harvest. Prisoners compared their bodies to those of friends who had stayed in Germany. Letters from home told of hunger, long bread lines, and tiny rations. Families survived on potatoes, turnips, or watery soup. Children were thin and sick. Mothers traded clothes for food. The contrast was painful. One prisoner wrote in his diary, "I eat meat twice a week, sometimes 3 times. My wife writes that she has not seen meat in months. I drink milk every day. My daughter dreams of milk." The guilt was heavy. Some men cried after meals. Some sent food home when allowed: chocolate bars, coffee, canned meat. The Red Cross confirmed that millions of such packages went from America to Germany, a strange reversal. Prisoners sending food to families who were free. The prisoners also saw another side of America: abundance mixed with waste. On farms, they worked as laborers. In Michigan, they picked cherries for pies and ice cream toppings. The fruit was sweet, bright red, and plentiful. But when the crop was too large, farmers dumped tons of cherries into pits. In California, prisoners picked oranges and then watched as bulldozers buried whole mountains of fruit. One German shook his head. "We starve at home, and here they destroy food." At a sugar beet farm in Nebraska, a prisoner wrote, "One American machine does the work of our whole village, and there is so much sugar, they throw away the bad beets." The waste shocked them, but it also taught them something. America had so much it could afford to throw food away. Germany, with all its power, could not even feed its children. Inside the camps, the prisoners lived better than many thought possible. They had libraries with books in German and English. They had classes on history, mathematics, agriculture, and even democracy. American officers believed that feeding the body was not enough. They wanted to feed the mind. In Camp Concordia, Kansas, German professors taught classes with the help of American universities. Prisoners studied subjects that were banned in Nazi Germany: free speech, free markets, constitutional law. For many, it was their first time reading authors like John Stuart Mill or Thomas Jefferson. Some resisted. They said, "This is enemy propaganda." But others listened and thought and changed. The food helped the change. Every day, as they ate bread with butter and drank real coffee, they remembered the lies they had been told. Hitler had said America was weak, but weak nations do not feed their enemies like kings. Weak nations do not build factories that can make a bomber every hour or a tank every 7 minutes. The meals became proof that democracy worked, proof that freedom could produce abundance. And little by little, the prisoners began to see that the real strength of America was not only in its armies, but in its ability to give ice cream to enemies. By late 1944, German prisoners in America were living in a rhythm that felt almost normal. They woke up in heated barracks, washed with hot water, ate full breakfasts, worked on farms or in factories, and returned to camps where dinner was waiting. For many, the changes in their bodies were clear. Pants that once hung loose were now tight. Faces that looked hollow were round. Doctors measured weight gains carefully. The average was 40 to 50 pounds. Some gained even more. One American officer joked, "We will send them home so heavy that their families will not recognize them." And often it was true. At Camp Hearn in Texas, soldiers built what they called the Fritz Ritz. They had music groups, plays, sports, and gardens. But the real center of life was food. The canteen sold Coca-Cola for 5 cents, the same price as in any American town. Candy bars lined the shelves: Hershey, Mars, Nestle. Ice cream appeared in summer. Prisoners spent their camp money buying treats that German civilians had not seen in years. One German engineer wrote in a letter, "In Germany, sugar is rationed by grams. Here it sits in bowls on every table. Men spoon it into their coffee until it is sweet as honey. Nobody counts. Nobody cares." The holidays made the contrast sharper. Thanksgiving 1944 came during one of the darkest moments of the war. In Europe, the Battle of the Bulge was beginning. German civilians ate turnip soup. Children cried from hunger. But in American camps, prisoners sat at long tables filled with roast turkey, glazed ham, mashed potatoes with butter and cream, vegetables, fresh rolls, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, and coffee. One prisoner wrote later, We sat before this feast in silence. Yeah, some men cried. We thought of our families, of our children with empty stomachs. We ate, but each bite was heavy with guilt. At Christmas, American church groups brought gifts, homemade cookies, knitted socks, cigarettes, books. Even children sent cards to the prisoners. In Camp Aliceville, the Methodist women baked 2,000 cookies. In Kansas, local farmers delivered pies. The prisoners could not understand it. Why would enemies give such kindness? One man said, "This is not weakness, this is strength. Only a powerful country can afford to treat enemies this way." Outside the camps, the prisoners saw even more of America's abundance. They worked in fields, picking cotton in Texas or fruit in California. Farmers fed them like guests. Breakfasts with bacon, eggs, and pancakes. Hot lunches with fried chicken and pie. Cold drinks in the afternoon. Then another full meal back in camp. Some men ate 5,000 calories a day. In California, they picked peaches and oranges. When markets were oversupplied, they watched farmers dump fruit into pits. Perfect food bulldozed into the ground. A prisoner named Kurt Vogel wrote, "Mountains of oranges destroyed while my family lives on turnips. I begged them to send the fruit to Germany. They told me it was impossible. This waste broke something in me. I understood then that we could not win. We had nothing, they had too much." The sight of waste was often more powerful than the sight of plenty. Anyone could believe that America had food, but to see food thrown away while Europe starved made the truth undeniable. In Nebraska, prisoners worked with sugar beets. Machines harvested fields faster than hundreds of men with hand tools. In Michigan, they saw cherries packed into cans for pies and ice cream sundaes. Some were thrown out just because they were the wrong size. One man said quietly to his friend, "If Germany had this food, we would never have gone to war." Every farm, every factory, every dining hall became a classroom. The lesson was simple. America was not weak. America was strong because it could produce more than anyone else, and share it even with enemies. The prisoners had arrived as hungry soldiers. They were becoming witnesses to democracy's abundance. In 1945, as the war reached its end, the German prisoners in America were living in a strange world of safety and food. Every day, they grew heavier, stronger, and more confused about what they saw. Medical officers kept detailed records. Major Thomas Richardson studied more than 50,000 examinations. He found the same pattern. The first month, little change as men's stomachs adjusted. Then rapid weight gain, 8 to 10 pounds in a single month. After 6 months, most prisoners had added 30 to 40 pounds. Some added more than 60. The health changes were dramatic. Diseases of hunger disappeared. No more scurvy, no more night blindness, no more swollen legs from lack of protein. But now doctors saw new problems, diseases of plenty. Diabetes, high blood pressure, even gout. One camp doctor wrote, "We treated men who once starved, now we treat them for eating too much." The prisoners themselves joked about it. They called it the American stomach. One man laughed, "I was thin in the Afrika Korps. Now I am so fat my belt does not fit." But behind the jokes was guilt. Prisoners knew their families in Germany were starving. In Berlin, children ate bread made with sawdust. In Hamburg, mothers stood in long lines for potatoes. In Cologne, families boiled weeds from the street. Letters from home told terrible stories. And still, in America, prisoners drank milk every day, poured sugar into their coffee without counting, ate meat 2 or 3 times a week. One prisoner wrote in his diary, "I feel shame at every meal. My family starves and I grow fat. It is like living in 2 worlds at once." Christmas 1944 showed this contrast clearly. While the Battle of the Bulge raged in Europe, German civilians received almost nothing. Turnip soup, thin bread, maybe a little margarine. But in the camps, prisoners sat down to giant feasts. Roast turkey, ham with pineapple, potatoes with butter and cream, fresh rolls, pies, ice cream, and coffee. Feldwebel Richard Steinberg remembered, "We ate in silence. Some men cried openly. We could not understand how our enemies fed us like this while our families had nothing." The kindness was not only from the government. American civilians also gave gifts. In Texas, churchwomen delivered thousands of cookies to prisoners. In Kansas, farmers brought pies. In Alabama, children sent Christmas cards. One German officer said, "This was not weakness, this was power. Only a nation truly rich could treat enemies this way." The food was more than calories. It became a weapon of ideas. Every meal was proof that America was not what Nazi propaganda had said. The prisoners had been told that America was weak, chaotic, and divided. But they saw the truth with their own eyes. America was organized, abundant, and generous. Some prisoners began to question everything. If America could feed its enemies like kings, maybe democracy was stronger than dictatorship. Maybe freedom was more powerful than control. Even the smallest things carried messages. At mealtimes, sugar sat in bowls on the tables, free for anyone to take. In Germany, sugar was rationed by grams. In America, even prisoners could have as much as they wanted. One man whispered to another, "This is the real power. Not guns, not tanks, sugar." By the spring of 1945, many prisoners had gained so much weight they no longer looked like soldiers. They looked like shopkeepers, businessmen, or farmers, healthy, full, and strong. But they carried a heavy secret. Their bodies told one story, while their hearts carried another. They were safe, well-fed, and even happy at times. But their families were starving, their cities were bombed, and their country was losing the war. It was a truth that could not be hidden, and for many prisoners, it changed them forever. By the time the war ended in May 1945, more than 370,000 German prisoners were living in the United States. For many, it felt like living in a dream. Safe, fed, even educated, while their families in Germany faced hunger and ruins. When the time came to send the men home, American officers made notes about their condition. The reports often used the same word, well-nourished. In fact, some were almost too well-nourished. Many had gained 40, 50, even 70 pounds. Captain William Burke, who processed prisoners returning to Europe, wrote, "Their families expected skeletons. Instead, they saw men who looked like businessmen, heavy and healthy. It shocked everyone." The shock was real. In Germany, food was scarce. Cities were destroyed, farms broken, transport lines cut. Families lived on 100-200 calories a day, sometimes less. When the former prisoners returned, they stood out immediately. They looked strong, even fat, while their families were thin and weak. One man said, "When I returned, my mother did not know me. I was wide in the face, round in the body. She thought I was another man." But the new weight did not last. Within months, many lost 30 or 40 pounds again. They gave their food to children, shared rations with family, and returned to hunger. Some said it was worse than before, because they now knew what it felt like to be full. Heinrich Weber explained, "Better to have been hungry the whole time than to be full in America and then return to nothing." Yet the food in America had done more than change bodies. It had changed minds. In the camps, prisoners had seen things that broke the Nazi story of America. They had seen factories producing bombers every hour. They had seen farms so large that one farmer with machines did the work of whole villages. They had seen waste, food thrown away, because there was too much. One engineer wrote, "We finally understood this was not a war between armies. It was a war between systems, and in that war, we had already lost." The prisoners also studied. In Camp Concordia in Kansas, they attended classes about history, economics, and democracy. They read books banned in Germany. They debated ideas freely. For some, this was the biggest shock of all. In Germany, free speech could mean death. In America, even prisoners were allowed to write camp newspapers, sometimes even criticizing their captors. One prisoner later said, "They fed us with bread and with ideas. Both changed us." The combination of food and freedom worked like nothing else. Propaganda could be ignored, speeches could be resisted, but a full plate of food and the right to speak freely could not be denied. By 1946, when the last large groups of prisoners returned to Germany, many carried not just extra pounds, but new ideas. Some had studied agriculture and returned with knowledge of American methods, fertilizers, hybrid seeds, machines. Others brought ideas about democracy, free markets, and freedom of speech. And in the years to come, these men would help rebuild their country. They had learned, in a strange way, from captivity. The war was over. The camps in America began to empty. Trains carried German prisoners to ships, and ships carried them back across the Atlantic. They left behind the barracks, the canteens, the Coca-Cola bottles, the ice cream machines, and the fields of plenty. When they stepped onto German soil, the difference was immediate. Bombed cities, broken bridges, families in rags, children with thin faces, hunger everywhere. Many prisoners carried chocolate, canned meat, or coffee from America to give their families. Some children tasted chocolate for the first time from the hands of fathers who had been prisoners. Mothers cried when they saw canned milk, sugar, or coffee. These small gifts became treasures. But the real gift was knowledge. The men had seen America with their own eyes. They had eaten its food, drunk its Coca-Cola, and lived with its abundance. They had learned that democracy produced not weakness, but plenty. One officer said, "We came to America as Nazis. We returned as witnesses. We saw that freedom can feed even its enemies." Historians later said the weight gain was not just physical. It was symbolic. Every pound was proof of American strength. Every meal was a lesson in democracy. Every Coca-Cola, every ice cream, every candy bar was part of the defeat of Nazi ideas. Arnold Kramer, who studied the camps, wrote, "Propaganda could not have done this. Food did." And the prisoners remembered. Many spoke to their children about the food in America. They told stories of ice cream in the middle of the ocean, of sugar bowls filled without limit, of turkeys and pies at Thanksgiving. The children listened, wide-eyed. Later, some of them would visit or even move to America, curious to see if the stories were true. For Germany, the lesson was clear. Strength was not built from conquest, but from production. Prosperity did not come from war, but from work. And democracy, with all its problems, had shown it could create abundance for all, even for enemies. One former prisoner said it best. "In the camps, we did not just taste food. We tasted the future. It was sweet, it fizzed, and it was free." In the end, the story of German prisoners in America was not only about war, but about transformation. Men arrived hungry, thin, and full of Nazi pride. They left heavier, healthier, and with new eyes. They discovered that America's greatest weapon was not its tanks or planes, but its dinner table, a table large enough to feed everyone, even those who came to destroy it.